The history of heavy.
Hello and welcome to the History of Heavy podcast, episode 16. This is the show that traces the chronology of heavy music across genres, song by song. I am one of your two co-hosts, Michael Huntsman, now in the Bay Area, temporarily in the Bay Area, and joined by my Bay Area cohort, Big Daddy Dave Liebman. Hello, Dave.
Howdy. Welcome back to the neighborhood.
Thanks, man. I am here. I am in a town north of San Francisco, about an hour north of San Francisco, where I am temporarily lodged for some R&R and some healing that my wife has to do post surgery. Hence my background for those of you on YouTube. This room that I'm in isn't necessarily video worthy, so opted for the background, which makes my arms funny and things disappear and whatnot, but we'll make it work. Very excited to be here for this episode of the show. But before we get into the details of tonight's topic, some cleanup, a little house cleaning from last week. That being episode 15, when we talked about King Crimson's 21st century schizoid man. Don't know why I have so much trouble saying 21st century schizoid man, but I bumble that throughout the episode. But that is not the correction. The correction that needs to be made is that we repeatedly referenced the band After Forever over and over again when we were actually talking about the jazz ensemble Return to Forever.
My God.
Which I knew, but apparently didn't, because we said After Forever over and over and over again. I believe we probably did that as a nod to the mighty Black Sabbath. Come to find out,
it's so funny. Like, I'm so fluent in Black Sabbath. It's like, we're in California and we are surrounded by bilingual Spanish speakers. And you get this Spanglish where bilingual Spanish speakers will just say a particular word in Spanish, or we'll be speaking Spanish and you'll hear an English word. Right. And I feel like I'm fluent in Black Sabbath and I just say Black Sabbath words when it's close to what I'm trying to say. That's so funny. Yes, Return to Forever.
Right. And I caught it as I was editing, and I'm like, that's not right. And sure enough, but apparently there is, in fact, a band called After Forever that is a Dutch symphonic metal band from the 90s, whom sounds awful. I have no interest in exploring said band, with all due respect. But Return Forever is definitely worth your time. I spent some time going back and listening to some of their stuff. They're pretty great. And but yeah, After Forever, yes, a Black Sabbath song, yes, a Dutch symphonic metal band, but not a progressive jazz ensemble.
Well,
yeah.
So thank you for clearing that.
Yeah. It's probably the most we've ever referenced a band on an episode that wasn't Black Sabbath. So it was kind of funny, and I'm like, this needs to be corrected. So there we are, correcting it. But that is all for last week. That was a fun conversation about Crimson and progressive rock and jazz and metal, etc. But tonight we are talking about the mighty Led Zeppelin, and we are staying in 1969. And as we always do, we need to kick it off with the cultural corner. So Dave, take us where you want to take us to tee up tonight's song.
Dave's Control.
Thank you, Mike. Today we're going to take a detour, a little sidebar, because we have so many songs from 1969 as we did, I believe, in 1968. We have a anchor band here, and so we're going to take a detour from 1969, cultural context, and do a deep dive in a little bit of history and context of the band Led Zeppelin. So with that, in 1966, London-based session guitarist Jimmy Page joined the blues-influenced rock band the Yardbirds to replace the bassist, but soon switched from bass to lead guitar, creating a dual lead guitar lineup with Jeff Beck. Following Jeff Beck's departure in 1966, the Yardbirds became a four-piece with Page as the sole guitarist, recorded an album in 67, and went on a US tour where they played a cover song called Dazed and Confused. That's foreshadowing for later. We'll get back to that. The Yardbirds 68 tour proved to be exhausting for the band. Drummer and vocalist went in a more acoustic direction, forming a folk rock duo. Page, on the other hand, wanted to continue the heavier blues-based sound he'd established with the Yardbirds, and he planned to form a supergroup with Beck and himself on guitars, and the Who's Keith Moon and John Entwistle on drums and bass, respectively. Vocalists Steve Winwood and Steve Marriott were also considered for the project. The group never formed, although Page, Beck, and Moon had recorded a song together in 1966 in a session that also included bassist keyboardist John Paul Jones. The Yardbirds played their final gig in 1968, July 7th. They were still committed to several concerts in Scandinavia, so departing members authorized Page and the bassist Chris Dreja, I believe, Dreja, to use the Yardbirds' name to fulfill the band's obligations. Page and Dreja began putting a new lineup together. Page's first choice for lead singer was Terry Reid, who declined and suggested Robert Plant, who eventually accepted the position, recommending former band member drummer John Bonham. John Paul Jones inquired about the vacant position of bass guitarist after Dreja dropped out of the project to become a photographer. Page had known Jones since they were both session musicians and agreed to let him join as the final member. So in August 1968, the four played together for the first time in a room below a record store in London. The band completed the Scandinavian tour as the New Yardbirds, playing together for the first time in front of a live audience in Gladsaxe, Denmark, on September 7th of 1968, and began recording their first album later that year. After the album's completion, the band were forced to change their name after Dreja issued a cease and desist letter, stating that Page was allowed to use the New Yardbirds just for the Scandinavian dates. So the accepted account of how the new band name was chosen holds that Moon and Entwistle had suggested that a supergroup with Page and Beck would go down like a lead balloon, an idiom for being a very unsuccessful or unpopular, for being very unsuccessful or unpopular. The group dropped the A in lead at the suggestion of manager Peter Grant so that those unfamiliar with the term would not pronounce it lead. And the word balloon was replaced by Zeppelin, a word which brought the perfect combination of heavy and light, combustibility and grace. In their first year, Zeppelin completed 4 US and 4 UK concert tours and also released their second album, Led Zeppelin II. Recorded mostly on the road at various North American studios, it was an even greater commercial success than their first album and reached the #1 chart positions in the US and UK. The album further developed the mostly blues rock musical style established on their debut release, creating a sound that was heavy and hard, brutal and direct. Musicologist Steve Waxman has suggested that Led Zeppelin II was the musical starting point for heavy metal. That's later in the same year that Led Zeppelin's eponymous debut was released. So 2 albums in the same year. We will hear this again when we get to Black Sabbath. During the 1970s, Led Zeppelin reached new heights of commercial and critical success, made them one of the most influential groups of the era, eclipsing their earlier achievements. The band's image also changed as the members began to wear elaborate flamboyant clothing and changed their show by using lasers and professional light shows and mirror balls. They began traveling in a private jet liner nicknamed the Starship, rented out entire sections of hotels, and became the subject of frequently repeated stories of debauchery. One involved John Bonham riding a motorcycle through a rented floor of an LA hotel. Another involved the destruction of a room in the Tokyo Hilton, leading them to be banned for life from that establishment. This era also produced Led Zeppelin III and their fourth album, variously referred to as Led Zeppelin IV, Untitled, 4, or due to the four symbols appearing on the record label as four symbols, Zoso, or runes. The band had wanted to release the fourth album with no title or information in response to the music press going on about Zeppelin being all hype. But the record company wanted something on the cover. So in discussions, it was agreed to have four symbols to represent both the four members of the band and that it was the fourth album. With 37 million copies sold, Led Zeppelin IV is one of the best-selling albums in history, and its massive popularity cemented Led Zeppelin's status as superstars in the 70s. By 2021, it had sold 24 million copies in the United States alone. The track Stairway to Heaven, never released as a single, was the most requested and most played song on American radio in the 1970s, which is huge. Zeppelin's next album, Houses of the Holy, was released in 1973. It topped charts worldwide, and the band's subsequent tour broke records for attendance as they consistently filled large auditoriums and stadiums. At Tampa Stadium in Florida, they played to 56,800 fans, breaking the record set by the Beatles' 1965 Shea Stadium concert. So 8 years, Beatles held that record for 8 years, which I think is noteworthy in and of itself. It took a long time to break the record. By 1975, Led Zeppelin was the world's #1 rock attraction, having outsold most other bands of the time. On September 24th, 1980, John Bonham was picked up by Led Zeppelin assistant Rex King to attend rehearsals for an upcoming tour. During the journey, Bonham asked to stop for breakfast, where he downed 4 quadruple vodkas with a ham roll. After taking a bite of the ham roll, he said to his assistant, "Breakfast." He continued to drink heavily after arriving at the studio, and after midnight, Bonham, who had fallen asleep, was taken to bed and placed on his side. At 1:45 p.m. the next day, the new tour manager, Benji Lefebvre, and John Paul Jones found Bonham dead. The cause of death was asphyxiation from vomit. The finding was accidental death. The planned North American tour was canceled, and despite rumors that other contemporary greats would join the group as his replacement, the remaining members decided to disband. December 1980, issuing a press statement ending that we could not continue as we were. The remaining members of the band go on to be very active in music and many, many solo projects and other joint projects with each other and different members of the musical and film community, in fact, and are still around. I saw a video recently of Robert Plant singing with the Preservation Hall Jazz Band. So like they're still active, they're still doing things, but this is a foundational band in rock and roll history. This is a fundamental band in our conversation. And so I wanted to give some deep historical context on where they were when they wrote the song we're talking about and what that led to in its adjacent period.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you for the quick biography. It's funny talking about Bonham. There are two significant sort of celebrity deaths that I can exactly pinpoint where I was when I heard of them. One is John Lennon and the other is John Bonham. I can't remember where I was when I heard Kurt Cobain died, and that was, you know, a lot many years after the
A
fact.
lot of hype. Yeah, that got a lot of press.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it happening, but I don't remember the moment I heard. And I wasn't even the biggest Led Zeppelin fan, and I can remember specifically where I was when I heard that John Bonham died, which is crazy. Also, I feel like of the 15, now 16 episodes we've done of the show so far, at least on 5 of them, we've talked about that band or song creating heavy metal, and we haven't even gotten to Black Sabbath yet. So that's I think that's all very interesting. And then the last thing about some of the stuff you touched on, if you haven't read, you Dave or you audience, the book, The Hammer of the Gods, it is a great read. Whether you're a big fan of Led Zeppelin or not, it is about all of the debauchery you referenced, Dave, and it is a really entertaining book to read. But tonight we're talking about Dazed and Confused. Dave mentioned the first Led Zeppelin album. I'm going to repeat some of the stuff that he just touched on as it relates to the song. But the song, as Dave mentioned, was actually not written by Led Zeppelin at all. It was written by San Francisco-born singer-songwriter John Holmes in 1967 and originally released on his album, The Above Ground Sound, that was released later that same year. After hearing Holmes perform the song at a London nightclub, the Yardbirds, yes, including guitarist Jimmy Page, rearranged the tune and added it to their set list, ultimately releasing their version of the song on their LP Yardbirds 68. As Dave mentioned, they broke up shortly thereafter. Page brought the song to his new band, christened Led Zeppelin, and included that song on their self-titled debut album. Notably, the recording of Dazed and Confused would be the very first time that Page would ever use his famous violin bow on the guitar in the studio. Led Zeppelin 1 was released on January 12th, 1969, and on the record's sleeve, Jimmy Page was listed as the song's sole songwriter. The song quickly became one of the band's signatures and a live concert staple for years, where the song would often stretch into 30 minutes and more. Finally, in 2010, all the way in 2010, Jake Holmes finally filed a lawsuit in U.S. federal court alleging copyright infringement, and in the fall of 2011, he and Page settled out of court. In all subsequent Zeppelin releases of the song, it has been credited as written by Jimmy Page and inspired by Jake Holmes, which is insane. If you listen to it's just a cover of the song.
It's a cover.
It is insane. So we will get very deep into Dazed and Confused. And my first question about the song is, look, obviously we were going to talk about Led Zeppelin. You cannot have a history of whether they invented heavy metal or not. You cannot have a conversation about the history of heavy music and not talk about Led Zeppelin. I had originally chosen Communication Breakdown as the song we were going to talk about tonight. Dave said, no. Let's talk about Dazed and Confused. So, Dave, tell us why this song. I think you offered up Dazed and Confused and another song from Zeppelin 1.
Good Times, Bad Times.
Of course it is. Good Times, Bad Times. Yeah. So I suggested Communication Breakdown, which I think is my favorite song on Led Zeppelin 1. I wanted it specifically to be Led Zeppelin 1 because it felt like it needed to be at the start of the band as it relates to the history of heavy. You put out Good Times, Bad Times or Dazed and Confused. And it may the answer may simply be I think those songs are heavier than Communication Breakdown. But why those two songs, and specifically why Dazed and Confused did you feel like is kind of the right one or one of the right ones to have in our ongoing conversation?
All right. Well, I'm gonna go even deeper than that because there's a real strong argument for half of Led Zeppelin 2 being on there, and it was also in 1969. So the reason that I lobbied for Dazed and Confused in particular was it has the slow heaviness quality. It is a slow, sludgy tempo. It also has a darkness to its lyrical quality. Its story that it's telling is like, I'm dazed and confused by this relationship.
Yep.
But it also has that like step down sonic effect. boom.
Yeah.
And it brings you down. It's this weight. There's a heaviness to it, and it just uh, really struck me as a really great example of what we're talking about that they produced. And it felt like both that and Good Times, Bad Times, because of the riff in Good Times, Bad Times, the kind of like just it's the very hard chord, very hard power chords with enough musical bridge in between to lighten it up so that the chord has more weight to it. Really just screams heavy to me in a way that Communication Breakdown, I like that song. It just didn't seem as heavy to me when we had these others to choose from.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We love to talk about genre. I think Dazed and Confused fits very nicely into your beloved electric blues.
100%.
Good times, bad times, much more what I would kind of just kind of blatantly call hard rock. Not as sort of bluesy, certainly as Dazed and Confused. And I think you're right. I think that bluesiness lends a heaviness to Dazed and Confused that maybe isn't in either Good Times, Bad Times or Communication Breakdown. So I think you're right, and it gets back to our continued conversation about how slower generally indicates heavier more than fast does. The speed of Communication Breakdown doesn't make it heavier. It has the opposite effect maybe.
In comparison, right? In a Void, you can certainly make an argument for it, but on the same album as Dazed and Confused, my compass clicked over there.
Yeah. Forgetting Dazed and Confused maybe specifically, but when you just think broadly about Led Zeppelin, would you put them in that category of electric blues as you did with Cream and some of the other bands we've talked about? Because
very much so. I mean, they come with from Yardbirds and Jeff Beck and that whole blues scene.
That was for sure.
And so it's in their DNA. But when we get to Led Zeppelin 2, I think there's an argument for a whole lot of love. There's a lot of blues in that. It's heavy power chord. It's slow.
Yeah.
It kind of like
shit. Yeah.
The song ends up sort of getting lost in feedback and effects, which has always frustrated me about that song. I just want more of that song. And that song is in this first year of the band, and we could have totally made an argument for it. But I like the chronology of this is the first album from this iteration of this group of people. And we should find something here if we find this band heavy, and we can, so we do, right? But there's plenty there, and there's plenty there in Led Zeppelin 2, and there's plenty there in the rest of their earlier discography to keep it into that electric blues. Now, once they get later into Houses of the Holy, then they start veering a little bit more folky, and they intentionally brought that into their musicology or into their sound musicality. And reading up a little bit more about the history of the band, which I had never done before this exercise, they kept experimenting, and I'm not as familiar with a lot of their later stuff. I had Led Zeppelin 1 and 2, and so I listened to those albums a fair amount 35 years ago. And a lot of the stuff sticks with you. Led Zeppelin is a band that I feel like I had quenched that thirst and like I've touched on the fact that I spent time working as a Harley mechanic, and there was a certain period where I could not escape classic rock, and I had kind of like had enough of it. And there were a lot of Led Zeppelin songs that filtered into that, but Rolling Stones certainly got into there, and like Doobie Brothers, and like there's a whole bunch of stuff that got into that era that I just have a personal aversion to. And so coming back to Zeppelin through this exercise was really refreshing. And I was able to get reintroduced to this whole album, but this song and this period of theirs. I'm like, oh, you know what? I like this. I forgot that I like this. It's okay that I like this, and I'm glad to come back to it now.
That's really well said. It's okay to like this, I think is sort of been my relationship with Led Zeppelin too. When I was growing up, you sort of had a choice of declaring your band being Led Zeppelin or your band being Kiss, and I was a Kiss guy. So I had to pretend like I didn't like Led Zeppelin for, 2 or 3 years, from like 5th grade to 7th grade or whatever it was. And so I kept them at a distance in my very early years, and then had my Zeppelin phase, as a lot of people do. My favorite Zeppelin album has long been Physical Graffiti. That's just the one that's the record that I always gravitated toward. But I am really unfair to Led Zeppelin in that I think like a lot of people sort of broadly canvass them with that hard rock tag. And they are so much more varied than that. I mean, we touched on the electric blues. You talked about their folksy side. Very interesting compositionally. Obviously, very talented musicians. Like they did a lot of different things and are sort of pigeonholed into this other thing, or this one thing. And for me, Zeppelin has always been, while I've always more or less liked them, they've never been like my favorite band or the band that I listen to all the time. I talked on the Beatles episode about how the Beatles have never left me, and I still listen to the Beatles deliberately listen to the Beatles all the time. Zeppelin is a band that I only about once a year or every couple of years do I deliberately listen to Led Zeppelin. I enjoy them when they come on, but only sporadically do I have a specific, 2-week phase or whatever where I listen to them regularly. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. Like I've sort of always kept them at a little bit of an arm's length. Like I've never owned a Led Zeppelin t-shirt. I've never, they're not a band I proclaim, even though I like them, and I've owned a bunch of their albums over the years, and they're great. I've seen Robert Plant live, and but for whatever reason, people love Led Zeppelin, and I've never been kind of a love Led Zeppelin. I just very much like Led Zeppelin. What's your history with them?
So my history is that I came to them, so you mentioned you never had a Led Zeppelin t-shirt. I never had a Led Zeppelin t-shirt, but there are a group of bands that exist to me as t-shirt bands. Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and Iron Maiden.
Ramones.
Well, these specifically were the t-shirts that the kids were wearing in junior high when I was in junior high. And I associate them with, and I still see these kids wearing these band shirts, and I associate them with a musical adolescence, like especially Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin.
It's like a starter kit.
It's a starter kit of learning, like it's a starter kit for your own independent musical journey, right? Now you're not listening to the programmed radio stuff. You've gone to the shelf and picked this album out, right? And it's album art t-shirt. And when every boy is 12 to 14, they get into this at some level and connect with it, and it blows their fucking mind, right? And you know, maybe there's some drug experimentation that's going along with that. And it's super compatible because that's what was going along when this music was written. So it's just like this musical developmental phase that happens. And so when I hit that phase, you know, I was that age too. I was 13, 14, and I was listening to this. What ended up happening was at that same time, I switched tracks and got turned on to punk rock. And so this was a little bit too hippy dippy love fest, and punk rock was real angry. And and you know, smart angry, you know, political and commentary and critique. So like it was just much more of the type of teenager, that brand of teenager that I was or wanted to be or identified with. So Led Zeppelin remained in my experience, but it was stunted, and it was stunted early. Like I got into Led Zeppelin 2 and sort of stopped for the first two albums, and I knew the other stuff. And of course, I've heard Stairway to Heaven about a million bazillion times, and I like that song, but I'm just not as familiar with the rest of their discography, and I didn't maintain a deep relationship with. I would put them in the analogy of my East Coast cousins. I know them, they're in my family. When we get together, it's like no time has passed. When we're apart, I just don't think about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That I mean, you described me using different words, but that is more or less how I feel too. And there, I have zero disdain. There's nothing about there's nothing about Zeppelin that is a turnoff to me, or you know, their fans don't annoy me, or you know, there's not that you know, the way you've described your relationship with the Rolling Stones. I don't have any animosity towards Zeppelin. I like Zeppelin, but they're just kind of there.
Yep.
On the t-shirt front, every time we go to Disneyland, we play Rock Band t-shirt bingo, and everybody selects 5 t-shirts that they're going to see throughout the day, and whoever gets to 5 first, kind of thing. And often we will say there are certain bands that are disqualified for participating because they're obvious. You know, it's the Ramones, it's the Misfits. And often Led Zeppelin will be on that list because we know we're going to see a Zeppelin t-shirt. That's too easy, so you can't include Led Zeppelin. But I think
that's a great game.
It is. It's a good time. It's a good time. Highly recommended. I think Zeppelin, in our chronology of heavy, where they sit in our song list, is particularly interesting because last week we talked about King Crimson and all the progginess and busyness and complicated time signatures and their jazz influence and everything that's intellectually going on with them. Next week we're going to talk about the MC5, which is kind of what you described about punk. You know, it's angry, it's political, it's fast, it's mean. Zeppelin is neither of those things. Infinitely more successful than either of those two bands. More influential, probably, than either of those two bands. Maybe the MC5 is.
I don't see any MC5 t-shirts.
No, right. I guess my pause there would be, I think there's a lot of punk bands that are very famous selling out arenas that were ultimately influenced by the MC5. But you're right. It's hard to compare that to Led Zeppelin. So musically, Dave, and maybe specifically to Dazed and Confused, as it relates to heavy, how does that song sit, you know, in terms of how it feels to you and how it moves you and its broad heaviness in between 21st Century Schizoid Man and Kick Out the Jams?
Well, really great question. 1969 is this evolutionary year, right? And we have momentum from 68, where I feel like our selections from 68 in aggregate are heavier than our selections from 69. And I misspoke earlier when I mentioned, going back to the Beatles in 68. That was also in our 69 year. And so we have to pause for just a moment and recognize that we have 5 songs from 68, 6 songs from 69, 6 songs from 70. This is where the rubber gets traction, right? The tire gets traction. And so we're going to steep in these couple of years, but where this sits in our song list is just exemplifying how transitional this time is. What is considered heavy doesn't have to be as clean as Zeppelin is a heaviness. It's these other songs that have heavy flavors, right? But this is an entree of heavy, but they can exist on the same menu, right? And so 1969, we're seeing heaviness work itself out. I think the Beatles' I Want You, She's So Heavy is pretty heavy. I think, Dazed and Confused is heavy in that same way. It has reached the purity definition of heavy. Whereas some of the other songs that we're going to talk about from this year and some of the earlier songs we talked about in our conversation are leading up to this moment. The moment is in transition, but just as every transition, there's a spectrum of that transition that's 100%. Like, I think that this is that one of the elements that's aligned 100%. And then, of course, we finally get into Black Sabbath next year. And so this moment is happening right as Sabbath is germinating in Birmingham, and they're seeing Led Zeppelin, and they're being influenced by this music that is newly minted, this heaviness that hadn't been there before. There were nuances, there were insinuations, there were threads and suggestions, but now we have a song that's heavy, right? I think that it's interesting to experience it in this spectrum of transition like we are.
Yeah, the Dazed and Confused specifically, it's hard to imagine that song coming from the band that would ultimately be the biggest band in the world for 10 years or whatever it was, 8 years, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
That song is really heavy, pretty dissonant, really slow, certainly not danceable. There's no groove. We should talk about groove at some point on this show because almost none of these songs have any real quote unquote groove. Some of them do, but let's put a pin in that.
And Good Times, Bad Times did have that groove.
For sure.
And so that was something that was attracting me to that. And so on this album, if you're listening to this song, you have had that, you've got an aftertaste of groove because you had to get past the first song to get to this song. So anyway, I interrupted. I want to hear the rest of your.
No, I think it's interesting that music this heavy could come from a band of the magnitude of Led Zeppelin.
Sure.
We've talked about grunge a bit, and certainly Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and some of that stuff was real heavy for being the most popular music in the world. But we're in 1969. We're roughly 10 years, probably not even 10 years from the most dominant music becoming true capital P pop music, where we're getting into disco and then ultimately MTV and one-hit wonders and very poppy and hair metal and all of these things that is so far removed from heavy being the most popular music in the world, that the fact that not only could Led Zeppelin, a band like Led Zeppelin, be as diverse as they were, playing as many different styles and genres as they did, but do something this heavy and have it be so universally commercially successful.
Sure.
I think that's really, I think it's really cool, but I also think it speaks to that moment in time that you're describing, where the Beatles are doing heavy, interesting stuff, and all of these bands are doing really experimental, cool stuff that isn't, super digestible pop music.
Yeah, we have to remember that Motown exists now, right? Like Motown is happening. Some of the big hits that were just a couple years before, like Henry Mancini and Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, like the popular music that is selling and commercially successful is changing because, call back to very early, the teenager is becoming a viable entity, a real
the dominant consumer.
Well, a real thing, and it goes from becoming a real thing to the dominant thing, and this is that transition that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. What else about the song specifically? Is there any? I mean, we've talked a lot about Zeppelin. We've talked a bit about the era and the heaviness broadly. That walking bass line certainly adds the heaviness that we touched on. Page's violin bow on the Les Paul adds that screeching sound that is certainly heavy. The moaned vocal of Robert Plant, and the tempo.
Oh man, his vocals, we didn't really touch on that. His vocals are fantastic, right? In this song captures the weight of the vocals. They're earnest. He's got a good tonality, but a strength. He just has a great strength to his vocals. That can't be understated. But another element is the transition, right? Like the song moves a little bit, and that's something that I like to see in a heavy song, because it allows for the counterplay. It allows for the heaviness to be really heavy, lighten up, and then exist again. And the contrast of, loud, quiet, loud, or heavy, light, heavy accentuates the heavy. It doesn't really focus on the light. The light is there just as the negative space so that you see the high contrast, bold lines of the heaviness. And that this song has that as well.
For sure. Yeah, it turns out the Pixies didn't invent loud, quiet, loud. I was just looking up Robert Plant's age. He was 21 when he recorded this song. What have I done with my life, Dave? What have I done with my life?
This right here is our redemption. We have consumed. They made this music, and we consumed it, and we have consumed it in such a quality way that we're able to talk about it to each other. I think that's
talking about Dazed and Confused is our Dazed and Confused.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I think that might be a good place to wrap it up. Is there anything about Zeppelin or Dazed and Confused that we didn't hit that you wanted to touch on?
No. I think that we've said what we wanted to say. I was able to touch a little bit on Led Zeppelin 2, which is the only other thing I wanted to bring into this conversation because it's got such heaviness too. If you're listening to Dazed and Confused and you like it, you should definitely listen to Led Zeppelin 2.
Yeah, Zeppelin's a funny one because I don't think anybody is listening to this and going, "Oh yeah, maybe I should check out Led Zeppelin."
Right.
But again, we had to talk about them. You can't talk about any kind of heavy without Led Zeppelin. Killing myself.
Yeah, and maybe the recommendation is if you remember this fondly, then you will also remember that you also like Led Zeppelin 2, and you should listen to that again because it's also good.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of even if we've sounded maybe a little lukewarm about Led Zeppelin during this conversation, their whole discography is great. I love In Through the Outdoor, which is their last record that is often panned, but I love that record. I think that record's great.
Yeah, they're another band that they make, even though I know I don't connect with all of their music, I know it's great and it sounds great. It's well constructed. The songs are well written. It's great music all around.
Full stop. Full stop. Okay, well, we'll see how great this song is because it's time for Song Be Song, where we pit this week's song against each of our current champions. We both hold the same song back from episode 14. That is the aforementioned Beatles' "I Want You, She's So Heavy." I'll go first tonight. Love this song. Zeppelin's great. They're not coming close to the Beatles for me. So "I Want You, She's So Heavy" remains my champion. What about you, Dave? What are you taking forward to next week?
I'm taking Led Zeppelin. I really like this song. Yeah, I really like this song, and I like the heaviness of this song. And as much as I do love "I Want You, She's So Heavy," and I think it's heavy as hell.
It is.
I like this song too, and it's not an easy choice, but I'm gonna pick Led Zeppelin.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise to me, but that's great. It's more fun when we disagree. The test next week will be interesting. We have oft talked about how punk rock isn't necessarily heavy as much as we love and enjoy punk rock. We're going to put that to the test next week when we talk about the MC5 and the all-time classic, Kick Out the Jams, motherfucker. So that'll be next week. Until next time, stay heavy, and thanks for listening. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, thank you. Bye.